Well, welcome to the Everyday Discernment Podcast. My guest today is Peter Lublink. He is an executive director for BethanyKids. BethanyKids is a registered charity in the UK, Canada, and the USA, and provides pediatric care across 7 different African countries. Peter has also traveled to 85 different countries. Peter, welcome to the show. How are you?
I'm doing very well. It's good to be here, man. Thanks for having me.
Yeah, and you're in Canada. We were just talking about snow. How's the winter treating you?
Yeah, it is a big shock to my system after spending 8 years in the desert with 120-degree heat to get to this below freezing stuff and a foot of snow. It's an adjustment.
So let everyone know a little bit about yourself and kind of how you got to this point in your career and the journey God's led you on.
Absolutely. So as you said, I'm living in Canada and I've spent the last 8 years living in the Middle East. While I was there, I was pastoring a church. I worked for a communications firm. Prior to that, I pastored out in Western Canada. So I've sort of been in and out of pastoral work and involved in sort of a church planting network. And then now I'm working with a Christian NGO, BethanyKids, and we do, as you said, pediatric work. So really excited to be getting into that. And I'm not coming into it from a perspective of being a surgeon or a physiotherapist, as most of the team are, but obviously coming from this leadership background, administration, pastoral stuff. So it's really exciting for me. Also to serve in an international kind of team like this, I find really exciting. I grew up in Europe. I spent time in Canada, again, traveled around quite a bit. So I find it really fulfilling to work with such an international team.
Yeah, that's cool. Yeah, and when I heard this, your name came across my email, and I had never heard of BethanyKids, but I actually think that's a good thing because I read about it, and I'm like, this is a really cool organization, and if I can use this platform to just let people know about it, then that's kind of what I felt called to do. And so I'm excited to dive in more about what you do and kind of how people can help support it. So if you just want to let everyone know too, how you became a Christian. Did you grow up that way, or was there a specific point in time where God called you into ministry?
Sure. Yeah, I grew up in a Christian home, so you sort of ease your way into it. You start with the habits and traditions of your parents, and then somewhere along the way they become your own, and you start to sort of hold on to some of the things your parents passed on, and then there's other elements of Christianity that you're like, man, I don't know if that one's really from Jesus, so I'll just let that one go. So there was never like a sort of specific moment. There's like a number of people, they have this sort of shining light from heaven sort of moment. For me, it was more gradual, just sort of experiential as you slowly figure it out for yourself.
Right. That's cool because, you had that foundation and you kind of had to make it your own. That's kind of me too. I grew up in the church and, there wasn't a conversion story when I was an adult, but it was still something that I kind of had to analyze, hey, do I agree with this? Is this just my parents' faith or is this my faith? And take the good parts and then other parts that are secondary issues kind of figure out on your own. But very similar story for me. And so how did you get to be a world traveler then, going to all these countries?
Yeah, I think part of it, I grew up in Europe, so I already had this sense of crossing borders was within my realm of experience. We used to go to church in France, but I lived in Germany. We live right on the border. So already we kind of had that in the DNA. And then we started traveling, my wife and I, even in university, we found excuses to get overseas. But it really kind of kicked off when we moved to the Middle East. And I think in the course of the last 8 years, we probably went to 75 or 80 of those countries in just the last 8 years. We get relatively solid summer vacations. We were, how it is in North America, it is hard to get, we're surrounded by oceans for the most part. Yeah. It is hard to get off this continent and not pay a fortune. Mm-hmm. But when I was living over in the Middle East, within 3-4 hours, you're in a dozen different countries. So it kind of gave us the opportunity and we did our best to soak up that opportunity.
Yeah, that's cool. So talk a little more about BethanyKids, kind of, the organization itself, maybe what you do and, how people can, we'll talk more at the end too, how they can support it, but just maybe a general overview to start.
Mm. Yeah, sure. So it started, I think, like many other Christian mission organizations back in the 80s and 90s. You had sort of a well-meaning Westerner who went over to East Africa and was providing pediatric care. And then somewhere along the way, 20 years or so, there was this realization that we needed to do better than just depend on one individual who was supported by the West. And so they shifted the whole model to start training local pediatric surgeons. So they began training pediatric surgeons from within Kenya and then invited people from all across the continent to train. So that has kind of always been the bedrock, is training pediatric surgeons. When those pediatric surgeons return to their home countries, they really self-identify as missionaries. Even though they're native speakers, they're in their home countries, they're really seeing themselves as people on a mission for the kingdom. So what we choose to do is continue to support those graduates. So even after they finish the training, we will help pay a top up to their salary so they're given a competitive and fair wage. Any child who can't afford care who comes to them, we'll pay for that. And then over time, we're also growing our sort of rehab program. So wheelchairs, physiotherapy, anything to increase the chances of those kids getting full mobility or getting back rolling into regular life with their friends. So that's it's been an interesting growth over the last 20 years as the organization has continued to stay focused on kids and to really be a Jesus-centered organization, but has shifted away from, I guess you could say, more colonial model of missions to be much more local, much more grassroots. So for myself, obviously, as a non-surgeon and a non-African, I'm not dictating surgical policy. I'm not telling people how to do rehab, but I'm really trying to connect the stories that I'm gathering from the continent of Africa, trying to resource those teams so that if they need funds, if they need program assistance for something, they need connections, I can try to open those doors. And I think you said it well at the beginning. BethanyKids has really been, while they've been doing great work for 2 decades, they really are not well known in North America. So the steep learning curve is really trying to get this story out, both the cause, the need for kids to have medical care, and also the solution that is this particular organization, and trying to champion that cause is what I do for the most part.
Yeah, and I'm sure the need is so great there because I'm sure a lot of the pediatric care is preventable, but being in a third world country, a lot of times I'm sure it's a lot of stuff that you're just kind of cleaning up after the fact. And so I'm sure that's some of the challenges, how to provide preventative care and also care after the fact. And what does that look like? And also what kind of partnerships do they have with like churches there to get people plugged in if they're not already as part of the mission?
Yeah, that's a good question. And it's a good point that we see a lot more, spina bifida, hydrocephalus, those kinds of conditions that are congenital issues, and that could have, the chances of having them could have been reduced with better nutrition as the nursing mom or as the pregnant mother had chance. But that's just not the reality for many people. So in terms of the preventative, we in Kenya, for example, we do a big mobile clinic, and part of that is public awareness, public health education for people, things like folic acid, just nutrients that you can get into your body when you're pregnant so that you can decrease the chances of some of these challenges. And then, as you say, that you can't change the entire world at once. There's still going to be some kids who are born with specific challenges.
Yeah.
So we try to take care of them both at a mobile clinic to kind of early identification to families, because one of the challenges we face is that families in particular, when they have a child and maybe they're born in a rural community, they don't fully understand the nature of what this child might have. So as an example, one of our staff members today, she was born in a community just near the Maasai people who, with the red robes and a very tall sort of cattle herding tribe in rural Kenya. So she was born in that area, in the Samburu people. And when she was born with spina bifida, the assumption was that she was cursed. Oh, wow. And, curse on one child, that's a curse on the family. So immediately her extended family tried to poison her, tried to get rid of her after she was born. And that didn't work. And so she lived until her teenage years But because of her particular challenges, she was not able to control her bowels. She wasn't able to do any of that. And so she tried to take her own life. She tried to poison herself in her teenage years.
Wow.
And it wasn't until she got connected to a church. She wasn't born and raised in a church, but she got connected to this church in her teenage years. And for the first time, really had this sense that there was hope. She got introduced to BethanyKids, to our surgeon, and they were able to actually help her solve her problems. And I think that's, to me, part of the beauty here is that the church is seen as a beacon of hope for people. And so we do try to have tight partnerships across the continent of Africa, where our goal, one of our stated mandates, is that as people come through our hospitals and our clinics, we want to make sure that they're connected to communities of hope, of grace, of love, people who will accept them regardless of whether they can, walk in a straight line or not, people who can really love them well. And that's not, that's not something that is simple, right? People often see the church, particularly in the West, maybe as hypocritical or hateful, or what all of this baggage that we're working through here. My hope is always that the church would be first and foremost known for their love. And so we try to partner with churches so that people who feel unloved, people who feel hopeless, are able to find love and hope within those churches. So we do try very hard to keep those connections alive and well on the ground.
That's awesome. And something that, without being there, being able to hear those stories definitely gets you a cultural perspective, but also a way that, we can show love. There's love of Christ, even if we're not there, and to be able to give or to, have some type of partnership to help support organizations like that are doing the work, that are the hands and feet that are on the ground. And so that's a really cool reminder that, there is such a big need out there. And a lot of times, I'm guilty of it too. We're in an American bubble if you're in America, and it's like, you don't realize that there's so much need out there, because all we know is honestly luxury. Even if we have challenges here, it's luxurious compared to 90% of the world, right?
Yeah, absolutely. You hear the word privilege talked about a lot today, and in historical and global terms, if you live in North America, you exist with a great deal of privilege. Yeah. You have, in most cases, access to public education. In most cases, even minimal healthcare. In a place like Canada, full healthcare. But just generally speaking, we have resources that most people historically have never had. We have, people in North America will say, well, I don't have a lot of options, but they'll have the internet. They'll be on Instagram. They'll be on Facebook. And you think, the resources that we have, even though seeing a doctor is better than Googling a medical condition, there are plenty of people in the world who they can't access any information outside of their local community. I was thinking even about food. One of the largest industries in North America is the diet industry, and this idea of eating less food. Yeah. The idea historically that we would have a people that needed so much help to eat less food when so many people on the planet are starving to death, can't access fresh water. The point is real, that it is easy for us to be in a bubble. And I don't think that's any one person's fault. Right. It's just, that is the reality. And as a church, I do think we have an opportunity to remind ourselves as a community, we are a global kingdom. Yeah. And whether someone's in Sierra Leone or Arkansas, they are our brothers and sisters in Christ.
Right. So good. Love it. Well, let's move on to some quick icebreakers to get to know you a little bit. So what would you say your favorite movie of all time is?
I would say maybe Secret Life of Walter Mitty. I just love the way it's shot, the travel, the story. It's brilliant. I love it.
Yeah. With Ben Stiller, right?
Yeah.
Awesome. And if you could meet anyone, alive or dead, who would it be?
That's a tricky one. I might say like St. Francis of Assisi, but I'm sure we need a translator since my Italian just doesn't exist. Yeah.
What interests you about him?
I don't know. Like, even as a kid, I had this fascination with him. There's just this sort of countercultural aspect to him, and particularly living in the period of the Crusades where everyone was taking up arms for the kingdom. And he was like, maybe we'll do it a different way.
Yeah.
And I just like when people stand up to authority like that and not just speak about it, but actually model a new way. So yeah, I think seems like a swell dude. I'd love to, sit down for coffee with him.
Yeah.
See what he's about.
What about an author you'd recommend or a book?
For me, in my own learning, I remember when I came across, Shane Claiborne's Irresistible Revolution, and that must have been almost, 15, 20 years ago or something. And it just hit me at the right time. And I think reshaped a lot of my theology in really healthy, positive ways, made me ask questions I wasn't asking before. So I would recommend that one for Christians to dig into.
Cool. And what hobbies do you have? What do you like to do in your free time?
I do a lot of running. So even this morning we had a big snowstorm with a foot of snow, and I still went out for, a 10-mile run,
Wow.
just to stretch the legs. So that is probably running and traveling are probably the two things I spend the most leisure time on.
Yeah. And running is traveling at the same time, kind of.
Well, I think that's why I like it, because I've never been sort of a competitive person. So when you get to team sports where the whole goal is to beat someone else, It just didn't really, I don't know. I didn't really get into it. Maybe I wasn't good enough at it. That's why I didn't love it, but I never got into it. Running though was I wonder what that neighborhood looks like. I should run through it. I've never been down that path. Yesterday I went left, maybe today I'll go right. Yeah. So I do love that sort of exploration of even in your own neighborhoods, in your own cities.
Yeah, exactly. Cool. Well, we're going to move on to the 2 discernment questions I ask all my guests. So if you want to start by telling us the time and you had godly discernment, kind of what that looked like, so we can kind of learn from the process, not so much the exact example, but, we all have a discernment process that God sometimes leads us through. So the time you had godly discernment.
Okay. I'll try to think of something recent here, and I'll go back to last year. So I started working at BethanyKids the first week in March. Oh, wow. And you'll know that, we said it's a medical charity, international, and that was the same time that already schools started shutting down, flights started being canceled due to the pandemic. And I remember having a conversation that first week with one of my staff members, and we were saying how do we handle this? And he said, well, I think maybe the best way we do this is, we just everyone, invite them, take their vacation, take 2-3 weeks off, and we'll kind of ride this out. And I remember saying, I think this is going to be around for 2 years, man. We need a long-term strategy. This isn't going to go away. And they're like, no, I don't know. And for whatever reason, I had this conviction that this was going to be around for a while, and we needed to adjust our model so that we didn't stop. We didn't pause anything. We continued. And I would prefer if the other person had been right on that one, but it's been a year and we're still in the middle of it. So I would say that was a good example of a time where I think I discerned what was happening well. And I would say that was sort of God's leading for this organization. And I'm thankful that, I paid attention and sort of, at the time, there's sort of a lot of with the media or people's hopes. Everyone always hopes it's going to go away quickly. Yeah, that's our natural instinct, right? And so for someone to say, hey, listen, this is going to be around for 2 years, and to start putting a plan in place around that, that sounds like the pessimist, right? Yeah. And it's easy to want to be an optimist in all situations. So I would say that's an example where I think I discerned correctly, fortunately, and we were able to navigate this thing well as an organization.
Yeah, it doesn't make you popular if everyone's like, oh no, it'll be gone in a month, and you're like, I'm not too sure. We need to kind of have a safety net just in case. And everyone in the world wanted it to be gone in months, but it's we have to be realistic sometimes, and having discernment is not just deciding something that is popular or that you want in your flesh, but you have to go to God and say, what is the real situation here? Joseph was in Egypt for 40 years and in slavery and all this kind of stuff. And he probably wanted it gone in a year, but God had bigger plans that ended up redeeming and saving Israel. And so time for God and us is 2 different things. And we have to, pray to be aligned with his timetable sometimes, and actually all the time. And so that's a good reminder. And I'm sure you going into a medical organization in the middle of a pandemic were like, what am I getting myself into?
Right. Yeah. I've said to a few people, if I had maybe a year to ramp up a bit, that would have been nice. In fact, what had happened, I was I was been living in the Middle East, as I said, and I was supposed to live there until June. I happened to be in North America for 1 week in February. And it was at that time, it was like, this isn't going to go away. And that was last day of February, so almost a year ago. So all I had was a backpack, and we were like, you know what, we're not going to return to the Middle East right now. Let's just see what goes on. And in the end, we never returned. We had to have friends pack up our belongings, get into our apartment, sell our stuff, sell our car, all that stuff. And again, it's sort of, when we talk about discernment, it's not always discerning what you want to happen. The best case scenario, sometimes it's realizing things are going to be harder. And your example of Joseph is a good one, both in terms of the tragedy of living there for decades and being able to say, listen, we're going to have some prosperous times, but you know what, actually, we're going to have some bad times too for quite a few years. We'll get through it if we prepare. But most people don't want to hear that. People are happy to hear we're going to have years of extra food, and people are like, yeah, that's great, thank you, good prophecy. Yeah, right. And then you say, listen, I think it's going to be a rough road, and I don't. That's not any kind of prophecy, but that in my case, it was just looking at the sort of medical data and thinking, I have there's no reason this would go away faster than 2 years. There's no scientific reason that this is going to disappear. You don't want to be right, but I'm thankful for the sake of the organization that we made the right choices in that season early on.
How has the pandemic been in Africa? Because I think they were one of the continents that got hit the least, but I'm not 100% sure on that. Can you clarify that, or how it's been for the organization?
Yeah, I would say there's a lot of sort of theories and studies as to why different places on Earth are being affected differently. In most cases, most of our hospitals, the big impact was that they had early sort of lockdowns on transportation, so people couldn't get to hospitals as easily. So we did see our work was impacted because children couldn't get to the hospital as easy as they could before. We haven't seen COVID, the disease itself, have too big of an impact. In most of our countries. In Sierra Leone, again, this is a place that already was hit hard from Ebola. We had our colleagues, actually, we have one of the only pediatric surgeons in the country who works in Sierra Leone is our BethanyKids person. And in their ward, 2 surgeons in other departments died of COVID. So it certainly has impacted people in different ways. Yeah. Certainly a lower death rate than what we're seeing in the States right now. And in other places in the world. And why that's happening, some people have projected that because most of the people dying of COVID tend to be older, because you have populations with a lower life expectancy, a lower average age, maybe that's the factor, but I think it'll take years for them to fully figure it out. In many ways, our colleagues have gone back to more of a normal existence than what we're having even here right now.
Yeah, and I know with the lack of travel too, it's probably hurt a lot of organizations that are mission focused, not just yours, because you don't have the people coming over to serve and to help, and the other doctors to come support. And I'm sure even financially, people are more strapped than they have been, so they're less likely to give to missions or to be able to serve. Would just be my hunch, but
yeah, no, and it's a fair point, and I think I'm really thankful, we're talking about discernment. I'm so thankful that 20 years ago, the people who made this decision had the discernment to say, let's shift our model away from sending folks from North America and focus on local development, because that took 20 years. Yeah. Right. That doesn't just happen overnight. Things take time. But then we get to 2020. The reality is we didn't need, as much as I would have liked to go over and support our people in whatever ways that I could, I didn't need to for the sake of getting kids surgery. All of our surgeons live in their home countries. Yeah. So in many ways, I think our program was less affected than many other organizations, because we don't have a model that depends on Westerners traveling. It's a bonus, and it does happen within our organization, but it's not an essential part of our systems. So we were still able to care for children. We still did thousands of surgeries last year, did 700 plus wheelchairs. We're still able to do the work, even though someone like myself is not able to travel. It didn't really slow us down. the challenge, and I think you mentioned it there, is that in the West, there certainly was a decrease in opportunities for us to raise money. If you're having fundraising dinners or speaking at churches, that sort of thing just is not happening this year in the same way.
Yeah, very true. What would you say a time in your life where you did not necessarily have the best discernment in, and kind of what you learned from it?
So I think I mentioned I pastored on the West Coast when I was younger, and I was sort of in my early 20s. And, for the most part, I had an amazing time out there. But I can think of plenty of times where you had the moment to say one thing and you said something else. Someone would say, hey, listen, I'm feeling overwhelmed, and I feel like I want to step down from this role. And you think, I should have just said, you're right. Yeah. That's a great idea. Step down. We'll support you. But you kind of push them to say, no, you could do this. You'll be fine. Let's make it happen.
Yeah.
I think there was, plenty of opportunities as a young pastor where I made the wrong call. And I'm someone I like to sort of get things done, and I like to push things forward, and you have this energy to make it happen. And I'm sure that for some people that probably came across like a bull in a china shop, and dude, just slow down, just pay attention a little bit more.
Right.
So I'm sure if you talk to people in that first church, 14 years ago, as much as I look back fondly and think amazing things happened, I probably messed a lot of things up too.
Yeah, we try to sledgehammer a door open is what I've said before. And
Right.
It's one of those things, waiting on God's timing, like we talked about before, is that sometimes we have to just be faithful where we're at. And then we have these great ideas, or God's given us a vision, but a lot of times that vision is maybe years down the road. And so we have to have discernment. Is this the right timing to implement this? Is God behind it? Or am I just going to be muscling through it and then, stress myself and those around me out, and ultimately maybe even fail if I'm just doing it in my own effort. So great reminder.
And I think one thing that is sort of I carry with me now as well is, I still meet people who are at different stages and ages, and some of them still have that kind of bull in a china shop approach or behave differently in situations. And I find I have increasing grace for people who mess up, because I think, I made plenty of messes myself.
Right.
And my intentions were good. I was trying to do the right thing. I thought I was doing the right thing, but it didn't come across like that. So I hope that one of the changes in myself is that I have more grace for people and their errors, knowing that's, I was in the same boat and probably still am making goofy decisions here and there. Yeah,
that's a really good point. So talk about the mission field in general, both local and abroad, having been a pastor and now in an organization. What have you seen churches do well and also not do well in supporting missions? Just some general themes, that maybe not everyone can apply, but just kind of what you've seen work well in supporting the mission field.
Right. One of the things that really encourages me, and it's kind of a very old school thing, but it was the relational connection that churches had with missionaries. Mm-hmm. And I think of like the old bulletin board at the back of the church. And, they've got like the prayer request, and they got photos, and they got little maps. And there was a real deep desire to create this relational bond between someone living on the opposite side of the planet and someone in a church in Tennessee. Yeah. So I think that is beautiful. There's a desire for relational connection within mission. I think that's amazing. I think the church, for all of its failures, has always had this desire to try to do things. Even when we did the wrong things, there was a desire to try to make the world a better place, even if that was misunderstood and clouded in issues of colonialism and everything. There was, I think, a desire to make things better, a desire to help, and a desire to stay relationally connected. So those are things I think are beautiful, and I hope we continue to see. I guess one more thing I'd say kind of about the historical church that we did well, there was a deep generosity. And, I think there's much to be learned from sort of, all forms of Christianity today. And one of the interesting things is our grandparents in many ways are just far more generous of putting money in the plate for their local church, for their international stuff. Like the percentage that they were giving was just incredible. And I think charities, even like ourselves, continue to benefit from older senior citizens who continue to donate well. And that has a huge impact, because our generation's like, well, I liked it on Facebook, so I'm good, right?
Yeah, right.
There's a deep generosity. So those things really give me hope. If we're looking to critique, I would say one of the things we can learn is that we have made mistakes in terms of missions as part of kind of national colonization projects, that we have maybe too often made missions about our country, the US, Canada, England, Spain, whatever it was. Too frequently we've tied those together. And I think we really need to separate them, to say, this is kingdom of God stuff. So I'm not there to teach my cultural values as a Canadian. That's not my purpose here. Right. I think we could do better on that front. I think we can do better at identifying local missionaries and getting them on our bulletin boards. And this is something I've really tried to encourage churches to think about, is don't get rid of that relational connection that we used to have. That's beautiful. The update that we could use is, rather than having, Mr. and Mrs. Smith who came from Tennessee and went to, East Africa, maybe we should get to know a local missionary who lives and works in their home country, local pastor, local surgeon, put them on a bulletin board, get on email. Like we have this, for many parts of the world, the internet connections, we have the opportunity to get to know other Christians who are doing incredible things. I think that would be really a learning curve for the church we could do better in. And I guess the last thing I would say is, and it connects to something I said we used to do really well, is the sense of generosity. And I mean this both for local and international mission. We talk more about being generous today than we are. You see Christians who are really publicly, we got to do this, but help this, and this is a great cause, you should help it. But they're not actually going to give themselves. So I would say those are some of the things that are a critique, as well as areas we could do better in.
Those are great points. I love it. And that's a lot of what, and I've seen in my church. I know a lot of other churches are focusing, they've had to focus on local because, we didn't have the regional, the global missions that we had last year. But at the same point, it's important to have those connections with what you're giving to, and not just writing a blank check for a cause that you're not connected to. And so that's something we've done too, is, get to know who's on the ground there, get to know the updates. And that's something our mission directors do really well at my church specifically, but also, going back to generosity, it's one of those things that, as pastors and seeing the money that comes in, a lot of times it's like 20-30% of the church that actually tithes the 10%. And you wonder, in an earthly perspective, like what could we do if every single person tithed 10%? What would this church look like? And you also apply that to missions. How much, if then you take every single church in North America, for example, if every church fully tithed and gave to missions, everyone tithed, and then the church tithed that 10%. I mean, how much more good and stuff could we do in this world, in the mission field, by just giving of our money like we're called to? And so that's something I have to check with myself too, is that, I'm not just giving to support a pastor in a church so he can have a better car. I'm honestly giving because first, I'm called to, there's a blessing when we give. And then third of all, because there is such a big need out there that, we have to be, we have to hold onto our finances with an open hand, because God gives us everything we have to begin with. And so we have to have that generous spirit, like you're talking about, not just giving our money, but our time, our talents, and our money to the church, to the mission field, to whatever God has placed on your heart. It's not that we just, shotgun it out to multiple people, and but have discernment about who you give to and why. Is your church supporting missions? Do they give a portion of the money that comes into missions? And ask. If you don't know, ask, because churches should be open with who they're giving to and why. And, a lot of times there's, budget reviews once a year at churches that go to them, be involved, ask questions, know where your money's going to, and know that it, if a church is doing it right, it really is supporting a much greater work than what you see with your own eyes.
Absolutely. I think, locally, globally, we've talked before, what is the reputation of the church? And there are a lot of negative things that are associated with the church, and which should upset all of us,
Yeah.
because we should be known first and foremost for our love. And generosity is part of that. The way we share what we have is one aspect of loving our neighbor. And that applies to whether it be BethanyKids or any other organization out there. Again, whether local, global, regardless. When we pastored in the Middle East, 10% of everything that came into our church, we would donate to other Christian causes around the world, other, missionary organization, environmental causes, whatever it was that was trying to make the world a better place. That was actually that priority of making sure that 10% was given away. That was done before there was any question of whether a pastor would be paid. The priority was, we need to make sure that when we know, because when people knew the money in the plate was going to make people's lives better globally, in some ways that actually increased the desire for people to donate, because they knew, like you said, it wasn't about buying sort of a super jet for a mega pastor. This was about making the world a better place. And your point earlier too strikes me, about how, imagine what would happen if we all did this. I remember someone saying something like the church is like a sleeping dragon. Like, it has so much potential to really change everything around it.
Yeah.
But we've been asleep at the wheel for a little while. And I think we could do better. And I think, global pandemic is an opportunity for us to really dig our heels in and show love. People are hurting really a ton right now globally. Our neighbors, they're in isolation, or they can't get out for growth, whatever. The list is endless. We have an opportunity to love right now.
Yeah. And that's something that, honestly, for as much, doctrinal theology issues as I have with the LDS church, they do it really well. They not only do they basically force their members to give, which is a different issue, but they also force them to serve, which, it's a double-edged approach, because you don't want to have to force people to do that stuff. You want them to be able to give out of their own heart in a generous spirit. But at the same time, they're able to build amazing buildings. They're able to serve in all over the world, because that's their mindset, that it's not even optional, is that I'm a part of this movement. I'm going to do this. And so, the American church has to definitely take parts of that, where, we have to stop seeing giving and serving as optional. It's not that I have to give, it's that I get to give, and that, out of that comes a blessing of knowing that I'm supporting the kingdom, and that God blesses those who are generous givers, the Bible says. So
Yeah.
last question I have for you is, mission trips are not just designed to help the places that are being served, but they also, we hear stories that it changes the lives of those who do the serving. So talk about this dynamic of what you've seen in your life, and how it's important to, serve others instead of just serving yourself all the time, how it kind of gets you out of that mindset of just me.
Yeah, I think that's a really good point. And again, there's been a lot of critique, particularly around short-term missions, as to how they're done, being referred to as sort of charity tourism, that kind of thing. I think part of it is that we need to reframe our language with short-term missions, and almost accept that we're really not doing a ton for anyone else in the world. If you personally went over to East Africa to do a thing for 2 weeks, you would be better to go in with the expectation you're actually not going there to do anything for other people. That's what you're doing daily, but long term, the impact is not huge on other people. Yeah. They'll be like, well, here comes another white missionary. We'll see another one in 2 weeks, and the bus will pull up.
Yeah.
I think we need to start to see that in terms of, we'll say, discipleship or training for our people. Part of this, what you said earlier, this kind of expectation that our people would be engaged globally and in mission. Because I think when you speak to a lot of people who dedicate their entire lives to service, people who donate regularly, a lot of those people can trace back a moment where they went to another place, they went to another country, they went to another scenario that was different than their own, and they had their kind of eyes opened. And I think we need to kind of reframe those missions trips to be awareness trips for the purpose is not for you to go, you're not saying to your friends, hey, I'm going to go build a school. You might do that. But what you're doing actually is I'm going to go learn about another part of the world. While I'm there, I'll help in whatever way that I can, but I'm actually going as a student. I'm going to learn from my Christian brothers and sisters globally who've got this church in a remote village, and I want to learn and I want to have my horizons extended. Yeah. And I think when we frame it that way, it starts to make a big difference because that's, to me, when I look at it, that's always been the biggest impact. Anyone who's been on a short-term missions trip, even if they talk about the impact that they had on a local village building the school or something, the real significant thing is they become more globally engaged. They become more connected to causes outside of their own. They start to chip away at that narcissism stuff. Yeah. So I think we need to reframe it and not lose our global connection. But I think we can do it differently, and probably we could do it better.
Yeah. Really good point. I like the term awareness trip. It's something that, you're not doing them. We can't come into the scenario thinking like, I'm just going to do so much in the 3 days I'm here, which 2 days of travel and 1 day of me hanging out at the beach. It's like we have to be aware and then take back your learnings and share that with people, document the trip, have a old fashioned slideshow, whatever you need to do to just bring awareness to the trip that you went on. Is not just about your hands and feet doing the work, but also I love that awareness, bringing it back to your church, writing a blog, doing a video that they show in the announcements, whatever that looks like, bringing that awareness out to help others see the need. Because I know when I see those videos, you're like, wow, it's almost like you're there for a second where you're like, wow, there is a big need there. I know where my money's going now, and I'm going to hopefully be more obligated, not obligated. I'm going to be more likely to give if I know the need is there. So.
Absolutely.
Awesome. So as we wrap up, I'll give you a chance to talk about Bethany Kids, how people can support through financial support, through communication and prayer. All these methods are important for charities to keep up their work. And so just kind of end on, the work you're involved in, what people can do to help support Bethany Kids.
Absolutely. So as we said at the outset, we're really looking to make relational connections with our surgeons. We've got 7 countries we work in, and we pay for part of those people's salaries in each of those countries. I would love to see individuals, Christian businesses, churches really say, listen, I love what's going on in Sierra Leone. I want to support this individual by name. I want to help them. I want to see their ministry flourish, get the email newsletters, like really connect deeply to the different causes and parts of our organization. So we're really hoping that over the next year or two, as we grow programmatically, as we serve more kids, that we would be able to get more donors in North America, churches, businesses, individuals who can come on board and help. And part of that is finances. Part of that, you said, well, is communication. The stories that are coming out, we want those kind of echoed and repeated and amplified around the world so that we can see what's going on. So if someone has zero money, then by all means, they can kind of share it. And I mean more than just like us on Instagram, but, share it with their networks, send grandma an email and be like, hey, I got this thing. I know you love these newsletters. Here, check this out. We do have a newsletter, so people can sign up for a newsletter on our website. We do have an Instagram, BethanyKids.ig. And we really try to put resources in Christians' hands in North America. So we produce a monthly devotional guide, which often features the stories of the children we serve and the staff members. We're doing a Lent guide that starts, and we're going through the sort of Lenten season together. We do the same at Christmas time. So we're trying to make sure we are really giving resources to people so they can share them. In short, we could use everyone's money, but we could also use your voice. If someone wants to travel, we can chat with them as well when the pandemic kind of settles down a bit. But in the meantime, we need champions for this cause. We need people who are willing to pick it up as their own. And, in North America, we have 2 full-time staff in total. Our marketing budget, our communications, like it is volunteers, they're ambassadors, people who just do it out of their free time. And of your listeners, if there's people who represent churches who can support us, we need you. If there's people who are like, hey, I want a champion, we need all the help we can get.
Awesome. That's BethanyKids.org, right?
Yes, absolutely. BethanyKids.org. And then on Instagram, BethanyKids.ig.
Awesome. Well, that is literally the life and death for children over in Africa. And, I'd encourage everyone to at least check it out. It doesn't hurt going to the website, seeing what they're about and signing up for the communication. And if I would love to hear stories, if your church ends up partnering with Bethany Kids, it is, like I said, such a great organization. And one of the reasons I wanted to have Peter on. So Peter, thank you so much for what you're doing.
Thank you.
And God bless you and the work you're involved in.
Thank you so much. It's been a pleasure.
Thank you for listening to the Everyday Discernment Podcast. For more information on Discerning Dad, go to discerning-dad.com. Be sure to follow on all the social media platforms. Just search for Discerning Dad. Please share this podcast with a friend and leave an honest review on whichever platform you listen. Feel free to send any comments, suggestions, questions, or prayer requests at discerningdad@outlook.com. Until next time, keep fighting the good fight.